Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's virtual talk, Lights, Camera, Action. We've got quite a lot of people signed up for this evening, so it may take a minute or two for you all to get in. So just document yourselves for a minute, or even better still, just go to the chat facility and tell me who you are and where you're from. And welcome, all of you. Hope you're sitting comfortably with popcorn. And it's just me this evening, no special guest, I'm afraid, but hopefully you'll still enjoy the talk, fingers crossed. Excellent. Is there anybody out there? Hi, Jeanette. Hi, David Lewis. Hi, Trish. Hi, Wantage, just down the road from me. Hello, Jenny. Hi, Zoe. Alison Trinder, that's a name I know. Hi, Monica. Wow, from California, goodness me. Caroline, Joanne. Lovely. The Murphy family from High Wycombe. Oh, it's lovely to see you all. Well done. David and Juliet. Timothy Walker, hi. John and Lynn. It's so nice to have you all here. It feels very strange sitting in a room talking to yourself, I can tell you. There we are. Excellent. Right, so I think we'll get started if that's okay. So welcome. I'm going to talk to you a little bit this evening about what happens to Blenheim when Hollywood descends on it, essentially. And my goodness, it can be quite a palaver. We have all manner of things filmed at Blenheim. It can be a very short something. It can be a very long something that goes on for ages and ages and ages. But it's always fun. So without further ado, let's have a look and see what happens when Hollywood descends on Blenheim Palace. Okay, so I hope you can all see the screen. Sorry, before I forget, actually, as well as the chat facility, there is also a little Q&A button. So if you do have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A, and I'll wait till the end and then I'll answer your questions then, if I may. Okay, excellent. So let's have a little look back at when Blenheim became associated with Hollywood, as it were. And this picture is actually a picture of Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. And they weren't filming at Blenheim, but they were there as guests of the 9th Duke of Marlborough. And this photo was taken in the early 1930s. And it's interesting because Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. were founders of the United Artists Company. And one of the co-founders was also Charlie Chaplin. And Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks were friends of the 9th Duke and Duchess of Marlborough. And Charlie Chaplin was a very good friend of Winston Churchill. And I happen to know that he also became a friend of the 10th Duke and his family. And I've actually come across photographs of Charlie Chaplin on holiday with them, with his family. So the kind of link goes back a very, very long way. There were some early films, and I actually had a question earlier today from Graham Palmer, who asked, was The Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines, was that filmed at Blenheim? And yes, it was, but only a very short clip. And it was filmed up at Ditchley Gate, which is right in the north of the park. And there was a sequence with an airplane taking off. So you're absolutely right, Graham. It was filmed there. Now, one of the other early sessions at Blenheim was when the BBC came to us in 1956. And I love this photograph because it shows the amount of kit that they needed in those days just to film a 1-hour documentary. they came to film at Blenheim because we were one of the first stately homes to open to the public. And we opened on the 1st of April, 1950. Now, ironically, last year, the 1st of April, 2020, would have been 70, or was 70 years since we opened to the public. And on the 1st of April, 2020, we closed to the public because of COVID. And here we are a year on. We have been open, but we've been closed quite a lot of the time too. But Richard Dimbleby came to Blenheim. He interviewed the 10th Duke and Duchess, and you can see all the paraphernalia that was involved, these great big lights and all sorts of wires and goodness knows what else. And what I really love is this monitor that looks like a 1950s TV screen. And if you compare that today to when people turn up to film a documentary or a short session, they come with just a handheld camera that has a built-in monitor and a speaker. So, times obviously have changed very, very much. Now, just to come forward in time a little bit, this is one of my favorite older films, Half a Sixpence, and it starred Tommy Steele, as you can see. And there's so much of this film is shot at Blenheim, both inside and outside. So it's actually worth downloading and having a look at, I think, if you're a Blenheim fan. And this is a picture of Tommy Steele, very, very awkward dinner that he was going to attend. And he's standing just inside the door into the Great Hall. So if you come to Blenheim, or when you've been to Blenheim, these are the doors that you will have walked through. And there they are having a very formal dinner in our formal dining room in the saloon. And the saloon really was the star on that occasion, because look how beautifully the table is laid. And the candelabra and the china and the cutlery all belong to Blenheim. Now, you would never have that happening today. But back in the 60s, it was a relatively new thing to have filming at a home like Blenheim. So there was a lot to learn, and we do a lot differently nowadays. Moving on, still with Tommy Steele, I'm sure you'll know that Blenheim is famous for many things, and one of the things is that it was the birthplace of Winston Churchill. And there is Tommy Steele, and there is part of his costume hanging up on the fireplace. And this is actually Winston Churchill's birth room, which is a relatively modest room on the ground floor. And what makes this even more interesting is the people in this photograph. So on the left is the 10th Duke of Marlborough, who was the grandfather of our present Duke. He was incredibly tall. He was well over 6 foot tall. And Tommy Steele is about 5'3", 5'4". There's Bobby Kennedy in the middle, and very handsome young man, hands in his pockets, but wanted to come and see where Winston Churchill was born. And the reason he's there, he was attending a conference at Ditchley Park, which is just a couple of miles north of Blenheim, and requested a visit. So the Duke was very pleased to welcome him to Blenheim. And recently, I read in the Duke's memoirs that he wrote about this, and he was toying with the idea of whether or not he should invite Tommy Steele to dinner with himself and Bobby Kennedy. And he did in the end, and he commented that Tommy Steele made a much better job of it than Arthur Kipps did when he was having his formal dinner in the saloon. So all that went terribly well, thank goodness. I'm just going to quickly have a look at the question. So what year was it? It was 1967. Did the 9th Duke and Duchess offer the house for filming, or were they approached or sought after? The 9th Duke and Duchess, there was no filming there at that time. So they just had Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford as guests. So there wasn't any filming back in the 1930s, as far as I know. And I'll come back to the other questions in a moment, if I may. So when people come to film at Blenheim, there are certain things that we can control. We can control the environment in terms of, temperature and things like this. We can make sure that the rooms are how they want them to be. We can make sure we have staff on duty, etc. What we can't control is the weather. And when, back in the 1990s, Kenneth Branagh came and did a bit of a recce, and he was going to direct, star, and film something that involved a ghost. He came to see if he could possibly film Hamlet at Blenheim. He came and did his recce. He was completely taken with the place and was very happy with it all. And the filming was to take place in February. And he needed snow, but it had to be the right sort of snow. You can see him there on the water terraces at Blenheim, and he's directing Kate Winslet, who played Ophelia. Now, when they came, there was snow on the ground, but it really was the wrong sort of snow, because unfortunately it was pristine one day, and then it started to melt and it became sludgy and people walked on it. So there were footprints and it began to be a horrible brown colour. So when the snow finally disappeared, they had to create their own snow. And in the Great Court, they did this by spraying little tiny, it almost looked like paper in the Great Court. And then, of course, they needed to clear it up afterwards. So it was quite amusing that summer, and it was in the early 90s. And if there was a gust of wind, these little bits of snow or papery snow would suddenly appear as if from nowhere. And I think some of our visitors from overseas were very concerned at the sort of climate that we had at Blenheim. So you can see that there's the Great Court, very, very snowy in the Great Court, but as if by magic, it's springtime on the other side of the railings. So the weather has to be controlled. If it's not controlled, then it can lead to all sorts of problems, and I'll come on to that again in a moment. So I mentioned that Kenneth Branagh not only directed Hamlet, which at 4 hours long is still the longest film in British film history, he also starred in it. So this scene was a particularly difficult scene to film. There he is lying in his coffin, and what you can't see is the camera that's dangling above him and the monitor, so he can see what's going on. What you also can't see is that over on the east wing, so on the left side of the palace, is where the 11th Duke lived. And the 11th Duke was a huge fan of Kenneth Branagh. And he had visitors, and the visitors were very keen to meet Kenneth Branagh. And Kenneth Branagh, I have to say, seems to be a thoroughly good egg. And no matter how many times the Duke came and asked to introduce his friends, he would happily pop up out of his coffin and shake their hands and be very pleasant to them. And not only that, he actually invited the Duke to, or he asked the Duke if he would like a cameo role in Hamlet. And so this extra on the end, so the third horseman that you can see there on the right is actually the 11th Duke of Marlborough. Very fine horseman. He supplied his own horse, and he was immensely proud and delighted to be asked to participate in the film. So much so that that became his Christmas card for 1996. He was absolutely thrilled. And there are times when, Blenheim staff do get to participate in the film, but none of us has ever been leader of an army. So, we don't normally get named. Just going back to the weather, this is a shot from Gulliver's Travels, which was filmed at Blenheim in 2010. And it was a film starring Jack Black, amongst other people. They came to Blenheim. It was a huge, huge thing. Blenheim represented the palace of the King of the Lilliputians. So it did play a major part in the film. You can see that in the Great Court, there's this huge banqueting scene going on. I don't know if you can see that. It was going to be filmed at night. And if you have a look at these standards, you can see that they're actually billowing a little bit because it was incredibly windy. And this great big white object that's suspended from a crane was a light source. And so it had to be raised high above the Great Court. But of course, with the wind, you couldn't possibly have that going backwards and forwards and swaying all over the place. So again, they had to wait until the wind dropped and the conditions were absolutely fine and perfect. And as far as continuity is concerned, of course, you can't have the banners billowing one moment and perfectly still the next. So you really are at the mercy of the English weather. And you know what that's like. So that's a little bit about the weather, a little bit about some of the early films. And we're going to just move on quickly to TV and see what sort of TV films were made there. Now, Oxford and the surrounding area is notorious for the number of murders that take place. And that's why we have Morse, we have Lewis, we have Endeavour. And we had 2 murders at Blenheim. And one of them took place in the kitchen garden, and you can see the police cars there. You can see an areas taped off. And this was the Morse episode called Last Bus to Woodstock. So the body's found. Lovely John Saw turns up in his beautiful Jaguar. He's ably assisted by Inspector Lewis, who you can see there second from the left. And thank goodness they managed to solve the murder. In 2012, we actually had an exhibition at Blenheim called Lights, Camera, Action. And it was such fun to work on it. And one of the things that I thought would be really lovely would be to bring Morse's Jaguar back to Blenheim. And we tracked it down, and the people that owned it were fantastic and said, yes, of course, you can have it there for a weekend. And it came, and you can see it was actually a snowy weekend, and that's real snow piled up there, which wasn't actually what we wanted. But it was just such a wonderful thing. I mean, I can remember watching Morse year after year after year, and then to actually have this Jaguar appearing. Of course, it was in a covered trailer, and the driver just opened one door on the side, and you could see the side of it, and he opened the other door, and you could see the other side, and then he opened the rear doors, and there it was. And of course, I was really excited about it and thought, surely he's going to say, do sit in it while I just reverse it up. Not a bit of it. So he got out, polished it all down, locked the doors, went off with the key, and of course, we couldn't fit it. We would have loved to, but there we are. It was so nice to have it back at the palace. So Inspector Morse, he was succeeded, of course, by Lewis, and you can see that there's all sorts of things going on here. It's a break in the filming, and there's Lewis having a bit of a yawn. You can see him in the top right-hand corner. He was obviously quite tired trying to solve that particular murder. But he and Lawrence Fox, so Kevin Whately and Lawrence Fox, were, again, very, very nice people to be around. And you can see them just sharing a joke there with 2 of our guides. So they were very good. Not only were they pleasant, they managed to solve the murder. And I don't know if you'll recall this, it was an episode called The Point of Vanishing. And this young lady here was celebrating her 21st birthday at Blenheim Palace. But her young man, her love interest, was murdered in the maze. But thankfully, Lewis managed to solve it. So all to the good. I mentioned that Blenheim, of course, is famous as being the birthplace of Winston Churchill. And again, when we came to do this exhibition, I thought it would be interesting to contact this very fine actor, the late Robert Hardy. And he lived very near to Woodstock, in fact. And he was at Blenheim for quite some time filming The Wilderness Years, which was a serial. I managed to interview him, as it were, over the phone and say to him, Mr. Hardy, tell me about playing Winston Churchill. And as he spoke, I took down lots and lots and lots of notes. And then I typed them up and I posted them to him because I wanted to make sure that I was doing some narrative for the exhibition. I wanted to make sure that it was correct. And lo and behold, I had a phone call. And I think it will be the nearest I ever come to speaking to Winston Churchill. So it was as though he was talking to a secretary. And he said, now, write this down. And I wrote, now read it back to me. And on he went. And he was just fantastic. He said that when he was approached to play Winston Churchill, he turned it down several times because he said that to him, Churchill was an absolute hero. And he just didn't feel that he could do it justice, he couldn't do the role justice. But thankfully, he did decide to take the job in the end. And he went on to play Winston Churchill 8 times, once in French, which I think is fairly impressive. But for the wilderness years, he told me that his dentist had information from Churchill's dentist, who said that Churchill had a small hole in his palate, which gave him a slight lisp. So Robert Hardy decided that what he would do was to have a plate made so that when he was speaking, he had something he had to fight against. And that really helped him to get Churchill's voice down to a T. At one stage, they were filming in Utah, and he said it was terribly, terribly hot. And this plate was very, very uncomfortable. So he took it out while they were resting, and he was sitting, popped it on the table next to him. And he said the next thing he knew, a prairie dog had appeared as if from nowhere, picked up the plate and run off with it, and it was never to be seen again. The other thing he told me that I thought was rather splendid, this shot is of Robert Hardy as Churchill standing beneath the Column of Victory, and it's the opening scene in the Wilderness Years. He said that he was standing with his back to the Column of Victory, and it was a really windy day, and there was a helicopter with the camera that was being buffeted by the wind. And as he was looking away, he could see the producer and the director with their hands over their faces and a look of horror on everyone else's face. And apparently the helicopter came within inches of knocking the first Duke off his pedestal. I think there'd have been an awful lot of trouble for that, don't you? So one of the other things that came to light when they were filming the Wilderness Years, when they were filming The Young Winston, I think, Winston Churchill was not only born at Blenheim, he was also baptized at Blenheim in December 1874. And they actually used the little baby daughter of the Duke's chef as Winston Churchill. And they were going to film the christening. Now, they had the vicar on hand to advise, and it's just as well they did. Before filming started, the vicar said, has this baby actually been christened? And Mr. Adams, her father, said, well, no, not yet. She's, we're still sorting that out. And he said, there's a bit of a problem. So anyone can actually carry out a baptism. So you can just say the words, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, and give the baby a name. And anybody can do that. So had the filming gone ahead, this little girl, Claire, would have been called Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill. So it's just as well that the vicar piped up when he did. Filming was stopped, christening was carried out, and then they were able to get on and film. So it's not just the weather that gets in the way. One of the other TV programs that we've had at Blenheim has been the Hairy Bikers. And they came, you can see them parked on the south lawn, which wasn't exactly where they should have been. They should have been the other side of the ha-ha, where the grass isn't quite as beautiful and pristine as it is on the south lawn. And then we've got two members of our marketing department who are having this lovely picnic with them later on. So again, it's always nice to have that opportunity when filming comes to Blenheim. So we have documentaries made at Blenheim, we have TV series, we have films, we also have adverts. And this was a 60-second advert filmed by Walker's Crisps. And again, when you think that they filmed inside the palace for this 60-second ad, which means the palace needed to be closed, they must have gone to an awful lot of expense. And you can see that there's this lovely golden carriage and there's a red carpet leading up the front steps into the Great Hall. And in the advert was Victoria Beckham, because she was advertising their posh crisps. And I must say, what a fantastic sport she was. So this was not long after she and David Beckham had got married. And there was a lot of information in the newspapers about them getting married in a castle, sitting in thrones, etc. And yet she allowed herself to be filmed like this for the TV ad, which I thought was fantastic. And so the scene is that she gets out of the gold carriage. She's got bags and bags of shopping because she's just been clothes shopping. She rushes through the staterooms saying how hungry she is. And she reaches the thrones, and there is David Golden Balls Beckham, she thinks. She gets out her Walker's Crisps, and of course, behind the football is Gary Lineker, who snatches her crisps. So go to YouTube, search for it. It's very sweet. And as I say, what a good sport she was. I mentioned that sometimes we get the opportunity to participate in filming. And this was me and my very hairy little dog, Percy, with John Craven, because Country File Live came to Blenheim on numerous occasions. When people want to come and film, they always do a lot of research beforehand, and they ask, all sorts of things. What they wanted to know in particular was about Winston Churchill, his painting, his love of animals. And so I spent a lot of time talking to the researcher. And at the end of it, she very sweetly said, I don't suppose you're free on Friday morning. And I said, yes, I could be. She said, do you have a dog? And I said, well, I have 3 dogs. And so it was. They wanted to film just a very short clip, 5 minutes, and it actually took 6 hours. So 2 mornings of 3 hours each. And it was a really, really hot summer, as you can tell by the state of the grass. And I had this particular dress on, a green dress. And at the end of the first day, they said, okay, lovely, can you be here again tomorrow at 9 o'clock? Yes, absolutely fine. Please, can you wear the same clothes for continuity? And I thought, oh, goodness, this is quite hot and horrible. So I got home and I thought, it's dry. So I thought, I can't wear this tomorrow again. So I shoved it in the washing machine all cold, and thankfully it didn't shrink or do anything horrible. And we were able to carry on filming, and it was great. And John Craven was an absolute sweetheart. And it was one of the highlights of my time at Blenheim, I have to say. So we're very, very lucky. Now, those are lots of the TV things. We're going to move on to the cinema. And again, lots of different films. And, if we sat here until midnight, we wouldn't go through the whole lot of films. So I'm just going to pick out 1 or 2, more than 1 or 2. So Black Beauty was filmed at Buckingham Palace. And this time it's being used as Covent Garden. And it's the scene when Black Beauty is being used to pull hansom cabs. And also the scene, rather disturbingly, when Ginger, who was one of Black Beauty's friends, ends up being taken off the back of the cart. She died, or he died. But you can see that they've built this wall across Great Court. There is no wall across Great Court. So it all looks really fantastic. And you can see the cameramen there taking shots and things. And what you can also see in the background is that it was a day when the Duke was in, because he's the only person that parks in the Great Court, filming or no filming. Moving on from there, I mentioned Gulliver's Travels, and it wasn't, I don't think it was a terribly successful film commercially, but it was a huge film in terms of the amount of time it took to film. It had a fantastic cast. And what I really love about this is the way it worked, as it were. So this is an artist's impression of a scene from Gulliver's Travels. The palace, as I mentioned, was the palace of the King of the Lilliputians, and there's Gulliver towering beside the palace. That's the artist's impression. This is what happened in the studio. So there you have Jack Black, who played Gulliver, and you can see all these little bits and pieces that are holding him down, supposedly. And then you have this green screen in the background, and this green screen technique enables them to put whatever background they want on there very, very easily. And you don't have to be a Harry Potter fan, but if you ever get the opportunity to go and visit Harry Potter film studios near Watford, do, because if you're a film fan, the techniques are absolutely amazing. So I digress. This is Jack Black in the studio, and this is what you saw on your screens. It's just amazing. The techniques that they use nowadays are fantastic. So when the story did stick to Gulliver's Travels, to the original, and at one stage in the book, the palace catches fire. So our palace had to catch fire. And in the book, Gulliver pees on the palace, put the fire out. Now, we had to be very careful about the liquid that was used for this. So if you ever need to know, then what you need to do is use 1 part mango juice and 9 parts water to produce the desired look, much safer, and it doesn't stain. So there you are, there's a bit of a tip. But you can see some of the stars. So we've got Emily Blunt, Catherine Tate, James Corden, and the absolutely delightful Billy Connolly. I'm a huge fan. Now, while the filming for Gulliver was going on, there were days when the palace was closed, but we've got other areas where we have wedding ceremonies, etc. And this young lady had booked her wedding. And at first she was a little bit disgruntled to find that there was filming going on. Although she had been told to expect this. But the scale of it was quite huge. And I have to say, Billy Connolly was an absolute star. And you can see him greeting the bride as though she were a long-lost friend. And if you look at her hand, you can see she's kind of leaving her new husband's hand and going towards Billy Connolly. And apparently, she almost had more photographs of her and Billy Connolly than she did of her and her new husband. And there they are on the palace steps with members of the cast. And there are the stars, giving her a wonderful round of applause. So I think that was a wedding day to remember for all the right reasons, thank goodness. So moving on from Gulliver's Travels, Alan Rickman, the late Alan Rickman, came to Blenheim and filmed something called A Little Chaos, which was about a French gardener called Lamotte, and a long story. But again, what I found fascinating about this was how, appearances can be so deceptive. So this is one of our staterooms, and here we have what looks like a state bed. Now, they knocked this bed up in about, I don't know, a couple of hours really, and it's made of a mixture of plywood, and you've got this wonderful fabric which is stapled onto the plywood, etc. So again, it's just so interesting to see how they do these things, really. Moving on from there, so not only Hollywood, but also Bollywood. And Kabhi Khushi Kabhie Gham is, I think, still the 3rd highest grossing Bollywood film ever. And this was a fantastic thing. The courtyard, the great court at Blenheim, was meant to represent King's College, and there was dancing and all sorts of wonderful things. But one of the things that I found fascinating when I kind of went through the paperwork was the negotiations that had taken place for the facility fee. And to the extent that the production company had actually written to the Duke and asked if they could provide a first-class flight and accommodation to Mumbai for the premiere, and so reduce the fee a little bit. But the administrator at the time was very firm and said, this is what we charge. And apparently, at the end of each day of filming, someone would open his pocket, pull out the required amount of cash in cash, count it off, and off it went. So that was a first. Harry Potter. So Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Now, this wonderful tree, this cedar of Lebanon, is absolutely stunning, and it's very eye-catching. It has a huge hole in the center of its trunk. And this was used for a 60-second sequence in this film. It wasn't the Whomping Willow. Okay, so the Whomping Willow was the one that used to thrash around and hit Harry and his friends. So this wasn't, but this was the scene of Snape's worst memory. And again, if you go onto YouTube and you search for Snape's worst memory, what happens is Harry looks, he's in Dumbledore's study. He's waiting for Dumbledore to arrive, the headmaster, and he looks into his pensieve. So this is where he can look into different memories. And he finds a memory which shows his father as a young man with his friends, and they humiliate Snape. So Snape's the one sitting underneath the tree here, and they turn him upside down to reveal his horrible grey underwear. And that's when Harry Potter's mum, Lily, intercedes. And that's when Snape's love for Lily develops, I think. But again, the filming took next to no time. There were frogmen in the lake. There were boats on the lake to make sure that everything was safe, even though the water's only about this deep at the moment. And, it took weeks to set up, couple of days to film, and it's just for this tiny snatch. I mean, it's just fascinating, really. So going on from there, we also had the remake of Cinderella, starring Lily James, and this time it wasn't Blenheim itself that featured, so not the house, but the bridges, so Bladen Bridge and also the Grand Bridge, because Prince Charming was busy looking for Cinderella, looking to see who fitted the glass slipper. And this picture was captured by one of my wonderful colleagues, Richard Cragg, who I think is listening this evening, and he'll be mortified. So this is the coachman changing from a goose to the coachman again. So all these things, as you wander around Blenheim, you never know what you're going to come across, really. Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery came to Blenheim to film Entrapment. And there they are preparing to poke up through the Great Hall, where Catherine Zeta-Jones manages to steal a priceless gold mask. And she has to weave in and out of the laser beams that are protecting the mask. And again, when we did the exhibition, one of the things I wanted to show or to portray was Catherine Zeta-Jones. So I thought, right, I need a leather catsuit. And bearing in mind this was a number of years ago and I was a lot younger and more naive, I went on to a well-known auction site and I typed in leather catsuit. I can't tell you the things that came up. It looked to me as though some of them weren't finished and they had holes in very strange places. But eventually we did manage to get one, and then we did eventually sell it on eBay again. But again, one of the things that will always stay with me, we put it on a mannequin, obviously. And it was very short from shoulder to crotch. And I had to ask the carpenters to help, and they cut out a section of the mannequin's pelvis, about 4 or 5 inches, in order for us to manage to stuff the legs in this wretched. But anyway, there we are. So Sean Connery was there for entrapment. He was also at Blenheim for a remake of The Avengers. So this is The Avengers with John Steed, played by Ralph Fiennes, and Emma Peel, played by Uma Thurman. So not the kind of Avengers superheroes. And there's Sean Connery playing the organ in the library at Blenheim. And he also played golf with the Duke. He, again, I think they got on famously. So it's rather nice to think that he was at Blenheim. I mentioned continuity earlier with the wind and those banners. So one of the problems of continuity with this were these snow globes. So there's the long library, all 84 feet of it, and it was full of snow globes. So someone had to literally walk up and down shaking these in between takes to make sure that they were doing what they should have been doing. So it's incredible the jobs that people have when they're working as part of a production team. Another of my favourite films to Blenheim was The Young Victoria. A few weeks ago, we had Sandy Powell give a talk, and she's the costume designer for Young Victoria. And she was telling us all about the dresses and things for Emily Blunt. Now, on this occasion, Blenheim really came into its own because they were able to use the long library to represent Leopold's castle. So Leopold was Prince Albert's uncle. And then they were able to use the front of the palace to represent Buckingham Palace. So there's Emily Blunt, Queen Victoria, arriving at Buckingham Palace. And in the last shot, just to go back, it says local boy Rupert Friend. So Rupert Friend played Prince Albert, and he's a very well-known international star. And he comes from Stonesfield, which is just a couple of miles north of Woodstock. And again, he was very kind and wrote to us to talk a little bit about his time at Blenheim filming. And he was there twice. He was there, first of all, alongside Johnny Depp, when Johnny Depp played the Earl of Rochester in The Libertine, and then when he played Prince Albert. And he said that when he was at Marlwood School, which is our local secondary school, he used to have a job at the greengrocers delivering fruit and vegetables to places like the Bear Hotel. He also apparently used to scale the walls into the park, and he and his mates used to have band practice in the park. He said it gave him great satisfaction to then stay at the Bear as an honoured guest, and it was wonderful to come and film at Blenheim, so good for him. Now, this is just a shot of what goes on really when there's filming taking place. And we do have to obviously protect the palace, and from basic things like putting down covers for carpet, etc., little signs saying not to put water bottles on the furniture, because our furniture is very precious to us, and it is very precious. And sometimes accidents can happen. And when things go wrong, then fortunately, we carry out risk assessments, we photograph, take extensive photographs, etc. And I'm just going to show you a shot of a film that was made, and you'll probably understand why there was a bit of breakage. So let's go to the next slide, if I may.
Action!
So, amazingly, in that shot, not as much glass was broken as you would possibly expect. So you could see there was an awful lot going on. It was the filming of the Transformers. And on that occasion, I think one of our skylights was cracked. So, if that happens, then it has to be put right again. When Gulliver's was filmed, there were a few episodes on the roof, tiles that were damaged, etc. But again, everything gets put right. So moving on, this slide, again, Great Court, where an awful lot of the action takes place. And it says on the slide, the caption is millions of cars. What it should say is millions of pounds worth of cars. And this was during the filming of Mission Impossible, Rogue Nation. And it was just incredible to see the cars that were in the Great Court. So what was happening? There was a charity a charity auction going on in the palace as part of the film. So you can see that the people that attended it were incredibly wealthy, and you had all these amazing cars. Now, unfortunately, the weather was not on their side. And, let me backtrack. So one of the things that, again, happens at Blenheim is that when there's a major film, we're all very keen to be on duty on those instances, because you have to have Blenheim staff there as well, just to help and to make sure that people stick to the areas they're meant to be in, etc. And on this particular evening, I was there just for 2 or 3 hours. It was fantastic to see what was going on. And what's going on here is that the people are meant to be arriving for this charity auction. It was a horrible evening, absolutely miserable. All these extras who, I kid you not, came from places like Wales, Kent, Birmingham, and goodness knows where else. They were all standing around with plastic bags over their heads, and it was cold and horrible. And I was tucked away just inside the front door there. And they must have, all they had to do was to walk from the Great Court up the front door steps into the Great Hall. And that's all they had to do. I say that, they did it about 30 or 40 times. Now, there was one lady in particular, and she was probably in her late 40s, early 50s, and she was immaculate. So beautiful hair and makeup, lovely big stiletto heels. And she started out the evening really well. By the time they'd taken the same shot about 15 or 20 times, she came out with words that I must admit I have never heard in my life. And she, the complaining, all of them really, about being cold, hungry, so-and-so's had something to eat, I haven't had anything to eat, why haven't you had anything to eat? And, you just think, it must be dedication. I can't imagine why else you would do it. But there we are. So this is a shot of a couple of the stars. We've got Alex Baldwin and Simon McBurney. So he was the evil genius in this, and you can see him there with the spectacles on. And I always think of him as being the choir master in The Vicar of Dibley. Now, in the background, you can see those poor patient people going up the stairs again. We've also got this rather wonderful shot of Tom Cruise, he works so hard, and the hours that he works is just beyond belief. And there he is with Jeremy Renner. Again, it was fascinating to watch what was going on, not only on that evening, but they filmed inside the palace as well. And they filmed in the green writing room, which is one of the rooms just off the saloon, off the formal dining room. And again, I was very lucky. I was able to be in the saloon and just have a look at the monitor to see the filming that was going on next door. And there was Tom Cruise, and he was acting opposite, I think it was Tom Hollander, if I remember. It was really interesting. And then I went to see it at the cinema, and I thought, so there was that scene, but no Tom Cruise. And of course, it's the moment where he pulls off his mask to reveal Tom Cruise underneath the face of the evil genius. So again, that was a really interesting thing to see. So moving on again, probably one of the biggest films that we've had at Blenheim is Spectre. So the whole 007 brand is absolutely huge. Now, I'm going to just give you a bit of a spoiler alert, I think. And in fact, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to answer your questions, if I may. I think that might be a better way forward. So bear with me a moment. So Trisha Duncan, what year was this? And I think, yes, no, I did answer that. That's fine. So there we go. How many films or series have been filmed there altogether? That's from Jeanette Leahy. Now, Jeanette, I recently, a local company did some research, and they came up with over 70 films or series, and they ranked us as being the stately home that's had the most films made there. So that's all I can say about that, really. Timothy Walker, what was the film which earned Blenheim the most money? Now, I'm afraid, Timothy, I have no idea. Really, the films that need us to actually close the palace to the public are probably the ones that earn us the most, because, of course, you know, they have to cover any loss of income for those days. So that's as much as I can say. And I wish I knew. There we are. David Lewis. Oh, I found out recently that Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, was involved with the young Victoria. Was she on set, and did you get to meet her? So the answer is, you're quite right, she was. I don't think she was at Blenheim, because I know she was involved because one of her daughters was, one of the princesses was in it, but I don't think she was at Blenheim. So there we are. And I didn't get to meet her. What film are Blenheim most proud of? Again, I can only speak for myself, really, but I think, you know, we're really proud of some of the documentaries that have been made, because we're very proud of our heritage, we're very proud of the palace, and we're proud of the people that work there and our legacy. So I would say that probably. Because remember, we're just a venue as far as that goes. So we don't have any, you know, we don't write the script, we don't employ the actors and actresses, etc. So I think that's probably the best answer I can give you there. Okay, right, lovely. So do carry on with your questions, but we're coming towards the end, and I am going to give you a spoiler alert. So, previous slide, just to go back, was of James Bond's amazing Aston Martin coming into the Great Court. And for Spectre, James Bond was played by Daniel Craig. Now, I was so lucky to meet a wonderful man called Mark Higgins, and you probably will never have heard of him, but he does the stunt driving for James Bond. So the spoiler alert is that Daniel Craig doesn't always drive his own car. And Mark, he was a rally driver and got into this business purely by chance. So this cradle that's mounted on top of this wonderful Aston Martin is where Mark sits. And of course, Daniel Craig sits inside. So the car is driven by an expert who knows how to handbrake turns and roll it if necessary, and goodness knows what else. And it means that the actor, Daniel Craig in this case, can concentrate on what he's meant to be doing, what he's meant to be saying, etc. But these things don't always go smoothly. And I'm going to show you a clip in a moment, so it will have a bearing on this. So Mark said to me that he's very experienced, and what he had to do at Blenheim was to take the Aston Martin, which was parked facing the palace. He had to reverse it, do a handbrake turn, and go right through the clock archway, which was built to accommodate carriages rather than cars, remember. And he had to do this at something like 60, 70 miles an hour. And he said, that's fantastic, absolutely fine. So the problem came because when you're doing this, you wear a mask. And you wear a mask of whoever you're meant to be, so whoever's meant to be driving. In this case, he was wearing a Daniel Craig mask. And of course, he had on his mask. And when you reverse, you tend to turn around to see what's going on or where you're going. And he'd never had to reverse at this speed before. So he said he got in the car very confidently, had his mask on, turned round, couldn't see a thing. Mask was pointing forward, his head was going backwards. So there were a few risky moments there, but all went well. And what I'd really like to do is to just show you the official trailer of this car chase. And Blenheim was meant to be Spectre's headquarters. 007 had infiltrated, he's discovered, has to make a quick getaway, and it's meant to be Rome, which explained why all the cars had Roma number plates. We were a bit puzzled about that until we saw the end, actually saw the film. So I'll come back to questions. Just watch this. And there he is in Rome, as if by magic. So I absolutely love that. So I hope you've enjoyed this evening. There are some more questions. I'll come back. I'll take those in a moment. But just so you know, next week, just prior to Mother's Day, we've got a Mother's Day special, and we're carrying on with the film theme. And I'm sure you know who the chap with the beard is, Graham Norton, but the I think rather beautiful young lady happens to be my daughter, and she works as a talent agent for Curtis Brown. So next week we're going to have a look at how you actually get to that filming stage, and also how you then get to the red carpet. So hopefully you'll join me then. But let me just let me come out of there for a moment, and let me just see if there are any other questions. Okay. Kata. Ah, now I know Kata. Which was the most challenging filming? So I would imagine, I mean, James Bond was quite a challenge, as I say. There was a lot that could have gone wrong there. And again, you know, if you think of him coming out at speed like that, he could well have written off the car, he could well have written off himself. But there are numerous challenges, as you can imagine. So let's see, are there any more questions? Let's have a quick look. There was filming at Blenheim when we visited last August. What was being filmed? Gregory, that's a very good question. Do you know, I can't remember. Oh gosh, and that was during lockdown as well, wasn't it? I think, well, they filmed, Bethan, she said, was it Dr. Dolittle? I think Dr. Dolittle was a bit earlier than that. I think that might have been 2019, Bethan, but good point. I know that they filmed Songs of Praise when we were locked down. So, Gregory, I'm really sorry, I don't know. I'll have to find out. If you email me, I'll find out and let you know. Anymore. Has the lake ever been used in a film? Kind of a little bit. So in Entrapment, the lake was, Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery were meant to emerge from under the bridge, but apparently it was so murky under there they had to abandon that. And in the Harry Potter scene, it had the Harry Potter's father, etc., going across the lake in a boat. But other than that, I don't think so. Were they filming The Crown? No, I don't think they filmed The Crown at Blenheim. Right, any more questions? Okay, so thank you all very, very, very much. No, they did not make a film about missing golden toilet. They might do one day, of course. But thank you so much. You've been a fantastic audience as ever. Do join me next week. I think it'll be great fun. Okay, thank you. And good night.